Every person in the village ate what Sven grew, and most of them never gave it much thought. He was up before the light on a morning in early spring, his boots breaking through the last thin skin of ice on the mud at the field's edge. The oxen were already yoked. Their breath rose in slow clouds against the cold air. The field had been waiting since October. This was the yard, the scratch plough that opened the soil without turning it. A narrow groove, no more than a hand's depth. Deep enough for seed, no deeper. The method had not changed in his grandfather's time, or his grandfather's grandfathers before him. Before the yard had moved a furrow, Sven had already counted the seed grain. He did this the same way every year, spread out in the dim of the storehouse, divided into portions, accounted for. What went into the ground now determined what came out in autumn. There was a mathematics to it that allowed no errors. They planted rye and barley and oats in rows that followed the slope of the ground. Root crops, turnips, parsnips in the lower ground where the soil held its moisture. Each row measured, each seed placed. Nothing wasted, because nothing could be. New lands had arrived that week. 3 of them had not made it through the first night, which was, on a mountain farm, not unusual. The ones that survived stood unsteadily against the longhouse wall, getting used to their legs and the world in roughly equal measure. Down in the village, smoke was already rising from the smith's forge. The woodcutter's axe could be heard from the lower slopes. The fishermen had been on the river since before Sven had left the longhouse. Each of them living, in the end, on the grain Sven had grown, none of them counting it. The planting took 12 days. By the end of it, Sven's wife had brought the children out to press the topsoil down over the last rows, the 3 of them moving behind him, tamping earth with their feet, quiet and steady. The field looked bare and improbable, as it always did at this stage. And then it was done, and all that remained was to wait for what the ground decided. Sven walked the field edges that evening with a stick, checking the drains. The village was quiet. The year was underway. Then the ground softened, the light lengthened, and spring became summer without making much of it. The animals were out on the upper pasture by late May. Cattle, sheep, goats moving through the hill grass without direction. Sven could watch them from the lower field without following. The pressure eased. Not gone, it was never gone entirely, but different in kind. The crops were in, the animals were out, and the work became maintenance rather than creation. Sven permitted himself, in a limited way, to breathe. His children spent the long summer afternoons mending the paddock fencing. It was a job that never quite finished, posts rotted, rails split, and the mountain weather held opinions about timber that timber rarely won. They worked without complaint. They had grown up knowing that complaint changed nothing. His wife kept a vegetable plot behind the longhouse, a garden that ran to its own calendar, answering to no one else's plans. She knew when to plant and when to thin and when to leave well alone. Sven did not go near it. He had learned this early in their marriage. Some evenings, Sven took a line to the river. The catch was never large enough to matter much, but it changed the stores in small ways. Fish for a week meant one less measure of grain drawn down. Every measure counted. The village went about its summer business. The smith had repair work enough to last the season. The woodcutter never ran short of trees. The fishermen supplemented what the village ate without quite closing the gap. Nobody's work ran as close to the edge as Sven's, but that was easy to forget from inside a forge or from the middle of a river. The summer was long and, by mountain standards, kind. The crops grew. The animals put on weight. Sven's wife extended the vegetable plot by 1.5 rows, quietly and without announcement. Then, one night in late August, the temperature dropped, and it did not quite recover. Everything sharpened. The grain had to come in before the frost took it, and in the mountains, the first frost could arrive at any time after late August. There was no slack in the schedule. 3 days into the harvest, the smith put out his fire. The woodcutter came down from the upper slopes. The fisherman tied off his boat. They peered at the field at first light and did not explain themselves, because there was nothing to explain. For 3 days, the village worked together. The grain came in fast when there were enough arms. Sheaves cut, bundled, stacked, carried. The long house filled with stored grain. It was the closest thing the year produced to community. Then the neighbors took their share and went home. Back to the forge, the woodpile, the boat repairs. Back to the work that was theirs to do. The field was not quite finished. A section of barley in the lower corner, slower than the rest, still standing, not yet ready. Sven had planned to let it go another 3 or 4 days. The frost came on a Wednesday night. He woke to the particular silence of it, the stillness that comes when the temperature has dropped hard and the world has gone stiff. He was dressed before his wife stirred. The outer rows of barley had taken the cold badly. Not ruined entirely, but close. He stood at the field's edge in the grey before dawn and did his arithmetic. The numbers were not good. He and his wife worked through that day and the following one without stopping. The children helped. They brought in everything that could be saved and left what could not, and did not discuss what the remainder represented. The stalls, counted at the end of the week, were thinner than they should have been. Not catastrophically thin. Not the kind that ended in starvation, but the kind where nothing went to waste, and nothing left the store without being accounted for. The autumn slaughter went ahead as it always did. The Norse called this the blot season, a period with a ritual character as well as a practical one. Not every animal could be fed through a mountain winter, and deciding which to keep and which to slaughter was one of the harder judgments the year asked of him. The meat was salted and smoked. The method was precise: too little salt and it would not keep, too much and it turned bitter. Sven's wife knew the proportion from her mother, who had known it from hers. By the end of October, the stalls were as full as they were going to get. It would be enough. Barely. Winter came down from the mountains, and the world closed. The longhouse held everything now. Sven's family on one side of the central hearth, the cattle and sheep on the other. The warmth from the animals was not incidental. It was part of why the building was designed the way it was. Outside was cold and dark and stayed that way for months. The days were short enough that the light appeared and disappeared before much could be done with it. The world contracted to the length of the longhouse. Sven repaired what had been waiting to be repaired. The ard, the yoke, the leather on the harness. Everything that had held on through harvest because there was no time to fix it had time now. His wife spun wool. The children carried water, mended small things, and kept the fire from going out. The longhouse smelled of wood smoke and animal and wet wool and spoiled root vegetables. It was not a quiet or particularly clean smell, but it was the smell of a warm winter and enough to eat. Down in the village, the smith and the woodcutter and the fisherman ate what Sven had put by. Bread from his barley, porridge from his oats, salt meat from his autumn slaughter. All of it from the same fields, the same stalls, the same careful count. In February, the stalls began to look thin. Not empty, Sven had managed them carefully against exactly this, but thin enough that portions grew smaller and the counting became a daily habit. The children asked fewer questions about food by February. They had learned the shape of the lean weeks without being told. The longhouse was quieter in that particular way things go quiet when everyone is conserving something. Then, in early March, the light shifted. Not warm yet, the air was still cold, the ground still hard. But the quality of the light at midday had changed, and Sven noticed it before his wife did. He always did. He was in the field before dawn. The oxen's breath rose in slow clouds. His boots broke the thin skin of ice on the mud at the field's edge. The ground gave a little under his weight, not much, but a little more than the day before. The yard was ready. The seed grain had been counted. The field was waiting, the same as it had always been.